So now that you have spent days to weeks to months searching for scholarships, you have searched deep down into your heart, you have unlocked your scholar avatar, and now you have checked the website, you have seen what the scholarship funding body is looking for, and you have confirmed that your scholar avatar has a good fit with the scholarship you are applying for. So what do you do next? Now is the time to apply for the scholarship. And of course, the scholarship time is essay writing time. The essay writing is like the most important chunk of the scholarship application. Yeah, so I asked this question. Imagine you are a judge. Imagine you're a scholarship judge. Which aspect of the scholarship will you prefer to assess your best candidate? Of course, the scholarship judge has limited options. He has to follow the scholarship criteria. He has to follow the criteria of what has been laid down by the scholarship funding body. So if they say they are looking for people that have first class grades, of course, he has to follow that. And then if they say people that are eligible from Commonwealth countries, what usually happens is that before that application gets to the scholarship selection team, the application has been pruned down. They have pruned down that application to make sure that the only eligible scholarships will get to the scholarship judges. Most times they have computers that have looked through, is this one eligible, is this one not eligible? They have removed the major, the bulk of the first round of the application is to remove the ineligible applications. They also do some mini screening before they finally have the best of the best at what the scholarship judges would evaluate. So that being said, so the grades are not really, at this point, the grade is not the most critical, because most of the people that have high grades are the ones that will be left, or the ones that have promising applications. So like what we said, you can actually have a second class grade, but put in a first class application. And if you do that, you will make it to the evaluation stage, and usually the essay is the place where you can make a difference, because whatever is written in your transcript is already fixed. Your academic grades are already fixed. The moment you write your exam and the result is out and you do not contest the results, you can never change that grade. As long as you have graduated, your university is going to continue giving them that same transcript. So you have very little. And then if you are a first class student or someone that has high grades, that is depending on only your grades, I want you to know that for every international or global scholarship, we have a lot of people that are competing with you from India, from China, from different parts of the world that also have very high grades, even across Nigeria. So how do you stand out? A key part of standing out is your essay. It is your story. It is where you can actually show that you deserve this scholarship and that you should be selected. So the essay is actually your secret. It is the most potent weapon you have to be able to turn your story around in any scholarship application. So what makes a winning essay? I'm sure many of us already have an idea. One major problem a lot of people have, a lot of Nigerian and African scholarship applicants, is that a lot of people go online and say, okay, let me check, how does the personal statement look? They just take that personal statement they see online, change a few things, tweak it to themselves and submit it. That's plagiarism. And it's very easy to sort out, to know. A lot of these scholarship funding bodies, they check your work. They check your work using a plagiarism checker. It's called Turnitin, and there are a whole lot of plagiarism checkers where they check and they know whether your essay is original or not. And now it might not even be that you copied word for word or you copied some part of it. It could be that the format you used, exactly the format you used, is the format every single person in your faculty is using to apply for scholarship. Almost all vet students, when they send me their applications, I see the same type of common and the same type of format, and I just know that these people, they did it like a group assignment, and a group assignment is not going to work in a scholarship. So originality is very, 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 very key. The second very important aspect of a winning scholarship is for you to answer the question being asked. You cannot escape answering the question. Beating around the bush, talking about things that don't really count, is very, very, very counterproductive. One thing you will find out in any scholarship application is that they have specific questions they are asking you, and they need you to answer those specific questions. They don't want you to ramble. That's why they give you a word limit. There's a word limit. Sometimes they tell you 250 words. Sometimes they tell you 150 words. Sometimes they tell you 50 words, 500 words, 1,000 words. It's just for you to keep your answer straight. They know that by the time you spend that specific amount of words, you should have been able to answer the question. Anything after that, you are rambling. So you have to keep to word counts. And that means focus. Be focused on the question. Make sure you are answering the question. Even when you are telling a story does not mean you should be rambling around. And then, of course, in every essay you are writing or story you are telling, you have to show passion and enthusiasm. It's your passion and enthusiasm that will determine how, in fact, it gives you an iota of believability. Because if you're telling a story and you are excited about the story you are telling, it is clear. Forget that you are right, it is in written word. It is clear for any judge to see. When someone tells the story and it jumps at the person, they know that this person has passion. And one way you can bring your story alive is to actually put a slice of life into it. Your essays have to show, you have to tell a story with your essay. You don't just assume that you tell the scholarship judge, I was the best candidate in my class, I was the best student in my family. Those kind of stories don't really, but if you want to paint a story, you paint a story with words. Paint a story with words so that the scholarship judge can connect with you. So these 4 elements, almost every winning story has all these elements. There are other elements that are also important, which some of them I will discuss them. But the point is these 4 ones are things you can't survive messing them up. If you mess any of these stories up on this particular 4 criteria I just mentioned, you are probably going to have it wrong. So that said, let's move on. So just like any essay, I'm sure we have done essays in school. So this is not an English class. I'm not going to be, going into tenses or grammar and stuff. But the point is, generally, every story has an introduction. An introduction, it has a midpoint, it has the main point of the story and of the essay, and then it has a conclusion. In other words, they say hook, story, close. Hook means you have to hook your audience because people don't have much time. And if I haven't told you this, I think I told you in the first class, every scholarship applicant has about 60 seconds to either impress the scholarship judge or his application will get thrown away into the trash can. Why? Because the scholarship judge has about 1,000 applications, 2,000 applications to view, 3,000 applications. You know how many people apply for the Commonwealth Scholarship every year? They said the success rate of Commonwealth, the last time I checked the figures, it was about 3%. Only 3% of people that apply for the Commonwealth are going to be successful. So imagine hundreds of thousands of applicants from across all Commonwealth countries. And maybe they have divided the applications, and maybe one scholarship judge gets about 2,000 or 3,000 applications, and they gave him like 2 weeks to look at it. So he cannot have time to look at everything detailed. After they have done all the screening and they have given him the one he should look at, the things he will be looking for, when he looks at your first sentence, The first sentence should jump to him. He should be able to, or the first two sentences. If he's not able to decipher something from what you are saying, or maybe you are using wrong sentences, wrong grammar, you are not telling him something that excites him, he's probably not going to look at it. So you have to go back and master this pattern of storytelling. Hook, story, close. Yeah, so you have a hook that gets the person reading your story, it gets him hooked into your story. And then your story should be like a slippery slide. When they say someone, you have hooked him, and then imagine he's like on a slide, and then the slide has a lot of oil on it. That's a slippery slide story. And so once the person is up there, he has no option, he has to go down, because what you are telling him is interesting. He's already convinced. It's like, he's already transfixed into your story. And so that's how you transport him down to where you are taking him to. What's the idea? The idea is that you have to be intentional about your story. Everything you are telling the scholarship judge is about your intentionality. Before you start, a blank page is your best friend, because that's where you have to map all your strategies down. And then don't bother. You don't have to be a Wole Soyinka. This thing I'm telling you is not about Wole Soyinka. It's just about, if you know how to add, if you know what a part of speech is, you know how to write a simple, meaningful sentence, you should be able to write a good story. And a good story is not about using big words. No, this is not about you big words. In fact, the more you use big words, the less your chances. Why? Because the people reading your essays, number one, might most likely are not from your field. Those people are ordinary people, everyday people, and maybe they are experts in another field. So they cannot understand the jargons you are using. So you should not use any professional jargon. As less jargon as you can, as clear as you can. That's the kind of story you should be telling to entice the person. You are not lying. You should not lie. We'll talk about everything. Part of being original is to be true to yourself. We'll talk about that soon. So that's why you need stories. You need stories. You need to tell a story. Why? Because stories connect. Stories are like, human beings connect with stories. Since when we were children, we have been hearing stories. Since when we were children, they have been telling us stories. They tell us stories, bedtime stories. They tell us stories in school. They gave us books with stories. So story is a very important component of the human experience. Tales by moonlight stories. We have been hearing stories. So the point is, if you don't tell stories, you will lose your audience. Your audience, too much of facts. Have you noticed that when someone keep reeling out facts or figures, it causes headache? But when you hear a story, facts can be embedded in a story. A story can be used to make a complex thing look simple, and it stays in the head. If someone tells you a story, I guarantee you, if that story was very interesting, in the next 5 years, you can still relate that story the way the person said it. But if somebody tells you about something that is a fact, even things that happen in the news every day that we hear, like facts, how many of them do we remember? But if a story happened around that time that relates to that fact, you are most likely not going to forget it. So that's why you need to tell stories in your essay, in your scholarship essays. So what are the elements of a good story? Elements of a good story. I've told you what the three basic parts of an essay, which is the hook, story, close. As simple as that. You hook the person, you hook your audience, you get them into the slippery slide, they go into the depth of your story, and then you close. You close. I'm also going to tell you about one format of story of doing that, which is known as the STAR method. But for now, what are the elements of a great story? If you look at historically, if you want to ask yourself, who are the best storytellers? The best storytellers are the Hollywood directors, and even our myths and legends of the olden days. There's this thing about them. All those stories, all those ancient storytelling and stories that we have been told, whether it's the story of Macbeth, the story of Katniss Everdeen in Hunger Games, or Star Wars, all of them have something very, very, very common to them. It is that you have a character who wants something. He experiences a situation or encounters a problem, and then that problem is causing a lot of despair. It's causing a lot of challenge for that character. And then at the peak of their despair, then a guide appears. A guide steps in, a guide gives them a plan, calls them to action, and that action helps them to avoid failure and ends in success, or they live happily ever after. I'm sure we all know that talk about living happily ever after. So the idea is, your story, whatever story you are telling, in this case, most likely you will be the character. You are probably talking about yourself as the character. One thing you did or one problem you faced, whether in your community, in your family, in your personal life, growing up, everybody can connect to this kind of thing. You talk about a situation, a problem. Without a character, there is no story. At the same time, without a situation or a problem, then what are you? If you tell us that, yesterday I woke up and went for dinner, and I had bread and toast, I bit toast bread and omelette or whatever, and I slept. So people will ask you, and so what? How that one take help us? Because there's nothing there that shows conflict. There's nothing in that story that shows that there's a situation that was grave and something happened and you were able to overcome it. There's no challenge. So why are you telling us? You're just telling us that you're a baby girl for life, and it doesn't make any difference to you. Help anybody. It doesn't change our life. So everybody's we look for interesting stories, and what makes an interesting story is just this format I've told you. If you look at any Hollywood story that is very, very nice, that any Academy Awards winning Hollywood story, you are most likely going to find that they follow this same format. And I didn't discover this. This is something I read in many, many books. There's a book called The Hero's Journey. You can find the book and read it. There's also another book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And that guy too also talks about this same format. This is the format that all great stories in the world have been known to have. Any story that doesn't have this type of format, most likely they don't do well in Academy Awards. They don't do well in a lot of, when the director tries to do something different, they always mess it up. So if you even look at it, which stories do you remember the most? It's about somebody that is experiencing a challenge, and that one thing happened, or they met somebody, their life changed, and they were able to live happily ever after. That happily ever after is one component that always shows up in most stories, except tragedies. And tragedies are not interesting to watch most times. There's always that happily ever after. Let's look at the story of Wakanda, the story of the Black Panther. The Black Panther, he faced a challenge. He had, at a point, he looked like he was dead. And, Killmonger took over the empire, and it looked as if, I'm sorry if you have not watched Wakanda, but I'm using it because it's a common story. And then what happened? From out of the blues, he was able to come back again, and he was able to now overcome the challenge. And so basically, any story you are writing in your essay, you should be able to follow this format. I will also show you another format that is similar to this, that breaks things down in a simpler format that you understand, which is known as the STAR method. That's the method most scholarship applicants or interview applicants use. It is called STAR method because it's an acronym for situation, task, action, results. In this case, we have decided that you are either the character of this story or you are the guide in the story, because the character or the guide, they are all human beings. And if you are following me, please let me know in the chats, because I don't know if I'm talking to myself alone. But the situation, task, action, and result STAR method is another variant of this last one that we talked about. The character is the narrative, But this star method, okay, you faced a situation. You are either the character or the guide. Maybe you are talking in the terms of, okay, somebody you know experienced a challenge and you help the person to find a plan of action, and together you were able to execute, and that meant the person overcame the challenge, and the person was able to move forward. In that story, you are the guide. Or maybe you are facing a challenge in your own life. In this case, you are the character. And then you met a mentor who gave you a plan of action, and you executed it and you saw the results. That is, in that case, you are the character. So in any case, there's either a character and a guide, but there's a situation. Situation is the challenge or whatever is going on, the circumstances that warrants that story to be told. Then there's a task to be carried out. Maybe you are in a community during your NYC, and there was an outbreak of rabies, or a dog bit a boy, and later on the boy died, and you are the only vet in that community. You realize that that community didn't know anything about rabies, and you started talking to people about rabies. You organized advocacy in that community against rabies, and then you did a vaccination campaign, and all the dogs were vaccinated in that community. And since then, there has not been any case of rabies, and now the people in the community are more aware of rabies. That is a story. So I've talked about the tax. The tax at hand is that there was a problem. Somebody was beaten and by a rabid dog, and there was a need. There was a need to take action. That means a tax was clear, and you took up the challenge, took action, and then there was a result. So any story you are talking about, if you don't include all these factors, you are most likely going to, because the person will be asking, and so what? If you tell a story and somebody is asking, and so what, then you have a lot of work to do. In your story, you should address every question the person is going to have, so that and so what will not come up. That is how you know a good storyteller. So some people recently, I've been seeing a new adaptation of this star method where people also add lessons. After you say this is the result, then you can also say these were the lessons I learned from that experience. That story alone is an impact story. It shows that you were able to intervene and make it an impact in a community. So automatically, you don't need to tell them that I'm a change maker in my community. If you mention that, you are telling. But if you tell them this type of story, you are showing them that you are a change maker. You are not only a change maker, you are a leader in your community. You see how you can use story to tell, to show, but not to tell. Okay. So generally, basically, the unlock method is the same thing. It's taking advantage of all this star method, this star technique that I told you about, and the story narrative that I told you about. So basically, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. What we're just saying is that for the unlock method, it is very aligned with your scholar avatar. That's clarity from last lecture that we talked about. You can't tell your story if you don't understand your persona or your scholar avatar, your strengths, your weaknesses, because telling stories generally is taking an inventory of all that you have been or all that you can be, and it boils down to who you really are, what you represent, what your aspirations are, what your goals are. So before you start telling stories, you need to begin with the end in mind, your vision. So that's the first thing about unlocking your stories. Your winning stories is about understanding, what do I want to achieve with this particular story? If they ask you a question in your scholarship essay, why are they asking me this question? What do they want me to talk about? And based on that, you will now ask yourself, what do I want to achieve by telling this story or writing this essay? How do I want the scholarship selection team to feel about me when they are reading this essay? So that way, when you answer that question, you will be able to know the kind of story you need to tell. That's why I was talking about the last example story I told you about rabies. That was a story of an impact story. You are like in an environment and you made an impact. A community development impact story. There are different type of stories. Yeah. But in this case, in the case of a scholarship applicant, I looked at it and analyzed some of the essays that I have reviewed in the past and my own essays, and I realized that I categorize them into different types of stories, which I will discuss with you later. But the idea of the unlock method is based on your scholar avatar. Everything depends on your scholar avatar. You have to choose one or two narrative moments in your life and tell them about it. But like I said, it begins with a blank sheet of paper. You have to have you get a blank sheet of paper, write everything you can write that you remember, write as freely as you can without worrying about what counts. And then you now start pruning it down and down and down. So basically, it begins with knowing which type of stories do you want to tell. So which type of stories do you want to tell? So let me give you an example of a story with 3 slides. I'm sorry, this slide is going to be worded because I just lifted it directly from a true story. So I'm just going to read it out now. My story begins 2 weeks before I was born, sometime in August 1986. My dad came home to my pregnant mother one afternoon with a letter in his hands. He had been sacked from his job where he worked as a government-employed civil engineer. Growing up, I remember there were many days we did not have any animal protein with our meals. Not because we chose not to, but because we simply could not afford it. Meat was simply a luxury. Then my mother started keeping chickens in our backyard, which we sold to neighbors and friends. And the money she made, she used to augment the family income, which paid for our tuition, bought us new school sandals, and sometimes new clothes during festivities. My father still had not gotten a stable job. He got by week by doing one temporary job after another, and his pay was meager. But thankfully, we survived as a family because my mother ventured into livestock farming and was earning our own livelihood, though on a small scale. Looking back now, I realized that our lives literally depended on the poultry we kept. Then one day, disaster struck. My family lost 175 out of our 200 chickens to a strange illness, which initially caused the necks of the chickens to stiffen and curl in a grotesque fashion before killing them. To me, it was as if the world had suddenly come to an end. Back then, I had never heard of the word Newcastle disease. I did not even know that there were people trained to take care of animals when they fall ill. Neither did I know that the strange illness that wreaked untold havoc on my family's fortune was entirely preventable, if and only if I knew that there was something called vaccination. Thankfully, the years passed and we did not die. Then one day, after I had completed high school, I met a man who called himself a veterinary doctor for the very first time. He told me a lot about his exciting job and how he was helping people to solve problems like infertility in cattle and curing sick goats and helping to prevent animal disease from jumping from animals to humans. There and then, I knew I had found my life's purpose. I decided that day to become a veterinary doctor who would work globally, especially in the most underdeveloped regions of the world, where the poorest of the poor live. I made up my mind to help millions of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa prevent livestock and zoonotic diseases while also protecting their incomes and livelihoods. This, in a nutshell, is my life story. And it is the major driving force why I do what I do professionally, day in, day out. It is also the reason why I am currently applying and have continued persistently applying for this particular MSc program these past few years. So what does this tell you? This story, like I told you about, there's the issue of the situation, task, action, results, right? But in this case, this is a bit of a modification of that type of story. This is the story about a character who faced a predicament, who meets a guide who gave him an action plan, and he stuck to it, and what? He's now making a difference, living happily ever after by changing the world. That is the example of this story. How growing up, this character, in fact, his story started before he was born. 2 weeks before he was born, his father had lost his job already. Father lost the job. So what happened? Because of that, it meant life became very difficult for his family. They could not afford to eat basic. In fact, meat became a luxury in their house. And because of that, the woman, being the being the illustrious African woman that she is, she started making efforts to take care of, to rear chickens. And then a disease came and did what? Wrecked her whole flock. And because of that, chickens, their neck started turning, stargazing. And this boy didn't even know what turning of neck meant. He just knew that this meant disaster for his family. But many years later, he still had those questions in his mind about this thing that happened. That because people didn't even know that chicken used to catch disease. And suddenly this happened. So what did he do? He met, after he finished secondary school one day, he met somebody that was a vet, and he asked questions, and that person guided him. And then he now understood that there was something called chicken diseases. And that inspired him. Because of what has happened to him, it inspired him to make sure that that will not happen to people, the poorest of the poor people that depend on animals for their survival. And that's how he found his life's calling. So you see, this story automatically tells you a whole lot of things. You get, aspect of it follows the star method. But like I said, the main part of it is this element of a great story that all olden day stories follow. You will find out that every Hollywood movie always follows this format. So what's the idea? There's no part of this story that is embellished or that is a lie. You get, this story is a true life story. But it's not as if the exact way this thing happened is possible. The person that wrote it cannot remember exactly. If he used dialogue, he might not remember exactly word for word what happened, because you cannot be remembering what this person said, except you recorded what the person said. But it still does not mean that the story is a lie, because the story happened. You get? So when you're telling your stories, be sure to be, you might not be exactly as factual as it is, but tell your story as close to the original as you remember it. So you should have, and everybody has this type of stories. We were all raised one way or the other. And mind you, this is not a poverty porn story. I will discuss that too. So let's move on from this. This story was just to give you an example, because as I was talking story, you are probably wondering, what is this guy referring to? But if you are following me based on this story I just shared, please let me put answer in the chat so I will know if you are following me before I continue. If this makes sense, please say yes in the chat. By the way, that essay is a scholarship winner. All the essays I'm going to be sharing with you, or whatever I like to focus on scholarship winners so that you know. You see how, when they say why personal statement, people will just start telling them that, oh, I finished from this secondary school, I have this master's degree, I have this, I've done this, I've done that. Anything you think you have done, it's good to talk about your achievement, but include it in a story format. Wire it so that you wire it into the consciousness of the people that are reading you. Because everybody is going to be talking about what they did or did not do, or the degrees they have, or the grades they have or they did not have. Trust me, they have already checked those grades before they even started reading your essays. They already know you have those grades, so no need to be telling them those things. The essay is an opportunity for you to make an impression that will last for a long time. So strategies to unlock your story. Like I said, everybody has these stories. These stories are in them. The number one strategy to unlock your story is to first determine the kind of story the essay question is asking you to tell. Every essay question is asking you to tell one story or the other. You know, some of them are similar, but the point is there's a story they're asking you to tell. Some of them will come directly and say, tell us about a time you overcame a challenge. You know, that kind of thing. Another question will ask you, how do you demonstrate leadership in your community? You know, some stories will tell you about, some stories will ask you, what are your, even when they ask you, what are your career plans? It does not mean they are telling you to tell them. When they say, what are your career plans? You should be able to tell a story about what your career is currently now and how the future is going to be another level of what you're already doing now. You don't just tell them that maybe you have not done anything. And everybody has done something, but we don't talk about it. So you start by telling them the story of what you are doing now and how this scholarship that you're applying for is going to improve what you are going to be doing in the future in line with what you're currently doing now. So the first thing is to decipher, clarify in your mind which kind of story is the essay question asking you to tell. If you know the kind of story the essay question is asking you to tell, then you can now proceed to tell that particular story. Apparently, people are not following me because it was only Nasiru that answered that he's following. That said, we'll still continue. So there are different types of stories. These are a few examples of stories that you can talk about. One of the examples is the mess to message story. A story that is probably talking about one point in your life where you were in crisis, you had a lot of problems, and then you were able to fine-tune that your challenge and you turned it into a solution and you started using it to help people. That's your mess to message story. David versus Goliath story. We all know the story of David and Goliath in the Bible. How David was faced with a mighty challenge called Goliath in his life, but he was able to overcome that challenge even as an underdog. So this is like the underdog achiever method. When you are like presenting yourself as an underdog in the face of a mighty challenge and you were still able to overcome. That's the David and Goliath story. Your hero's journey story. What is your hero's journey story? Hero's journey is about your journey from, like this kind of story I just told you now, about somebody that even before he was born, his family was already facing crisis, and he was able to go through those crises. That's a hero's journey, and become someone that is also now making a difference. That's a hero's journey story. Or it can also be a community impact story. The rabies story is a community impact story. One story sometimes might not fit only in one place. It might be two types of stories in one. And then there's also the collaboration story. Tell us about a time that you worked with other young leaders in your community to make an impact in an existing problem. They want you to tell a collaboration story. How will this scholarship help you to contribute meaningfully to your community and the country at large? They're asking you to talk about a future contribution story. And there might be other type of minor stories, but these are the major story types that I've seen in a lot of scholarship applications. This is based on my experience and the experience of other scholarship applicants that I've worked with and that I've helped to get scholarships. So first thing you need to ask under the unlock method, which story is this essay question asking me to tell? One thing is clear, it is granted that stories are important. We cannot do without stories in essays, and I've told you the reason why stories are important. So now the next thing is not about whether stories are important or not, it's about which type of story should you be telling that will make an impact in this particular scenario, depending on the question they are asking you. So if they say write a personal statement or a motivation statement, that might look like a general this thing, but if you read exactly the underlying theme of the scholarship, if they tell you that they are looking for impact makers in their community, they are looking for people that are leaders in their community. So you know that you need to tell about your impact story. So sometimes the kind of story that you are going to tell is linked to the criteria of selection. It might not be linked to the specific essay question per se. They might not even tell you this is the specific story you should tell or tell us about a time. It could be that they are hinting about it in their selection criteria. That's why you need to master the scholarship adverts to know the kind of story you should be telling going forward. So that said, after knowing, like I said, let me remind us again, the story that you are going to tell is already in you. It is not a fabrication. So all you need to do is to unlock it. And one of the ways to unlock it is by, knowing the kind of story exactly you want to tell. And then because you have done your scholar avatar, you have taken an inventory of your life, you can relate and go back and see which kind of stories. I remember the first time it hit me that I had stories to tell in scholarships, because initially when I started applying, the first time I applied for scholarship, I flunked. I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't even know what was expected of me. And then I kept on getting rejections until it hit me one day that I need to tell stories about my life, and I have stories to tell. It's not as if I have not made any impact or I've not done anything. The people that I see that looks like I'm even better than them, they are winning scholarships. So I now started sitting down to ask myself, and then I took stock of my stories. I realized that I had a lot of stories. The thing is, many of us don't consider these things as stories but these are things that happen to us that we underrate. These are things that we sit down with our friends to discuss about, our family to talk about. You remember that time when Uncle Emeka came back and Uncle Emeka fell ill. We didn't know that this was what was wrong with him. At the end of the day, Uncle Emeka probably died of something. And, since then, I just knew that I was going to be a doctor because it didn't really hit me. I wanted to make sure that, what killed Uncle Emeka will not kill another person. That is the story. I'm sorry. I hope nobody has Uncle Emeka as an uncle, please. It's a hypothetical Uncle Emeka. But I hope you understand the point. The point is that is a story. And we have this type of stories in our lives. But we don't talk about it because we don't think about them as stories. We just be like, oh, that happened a while ago, and that's all. But you need to. Applying for scholarships, one of the strong points it will do for you is it will teach you to be able to audit your life. When you begin to audit your life, you begin to put your experiences together. And please, if you don't write a journal or you don't keep a diary, please start keeping a diary today. Excuse me. Start keeping a diary today, because that's one way you can record. And so that when you need to take stock of events or write stories, it will come naturally to you because you have been writing things down on a daily. And you don't have to write long journals. It could be just like one paragraph. This happened, that happened. Because if you want to be an impact professional, not just a scholarship applicant, everywhere you will tell stories. All through your life, you tell stories. In boardrooms, you tell stories. In interviews, you tell stories. And you never can tell how many interviews you need to go for. So look at someone like Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. At this time in her life, in her 60s, she's getting a new job, a very prestigious job. And I'm sure that they must have gone for numerous interviews to become a WTO director. And that's not, so she must have called upon her wealth of experience, her wealth of stories, and a whole lot of things to convince people to vote for her as the WTO director. So these skills you are learning are not just to pass this. You might think it's just to pass the scholarship. It's actually for you to become a leader that can tell stories that will move people to action. In this case, what are you trying to do? You are trying to move the scholarship judges, move them into an action, which means selecting you for the scholarship. And you are using your story to talk about it. So story is a weapon for anybody to make an impact in this world. And your story is already in you. Yeah, I have to hurry up to round up quickly. So strategies to unlock your story. One of the strategies to unlock your story, apart from knowing the right story to tell, you have to have a mind mapping process. And different people use different things for mind mapping, like paper, like whiteboard, And there are also apps that you can use for mind mapping. If you have been keeping your journals or diaries in the past, now is the time to call on them, to look back at them. And then you can even go back to your CV, check your certificates, your awards. If you got an award in university, what happened? Why did they give you that award? What was the story behind all those activities? If something happened when you were in university that you remember, try to recall the scenario of what led to that thing. You know, if you have always been a gender advocate in university, and you know people were antagonizing you because they feel you are very confident as a woman, you are raising your voice too much. You know, there was an incident that one boy slapped one girl in school and you were the one that came to her aid, and since then you knew that you wanted to be a gender advocate. These are all stories that you should be bringing up and documenting them, not even before the scholarship, so that you have it on record. You can look through your photo albums, and these days now social media has made life easy. You can go back to your Instagram, ask yourself, what happened? Why did I snap this picture on these dates? And what led to that? You know, that's how you can unlock different type of stories that you have underrated in your life that can make a difference in your scholarship application. And you can talk to family, talk to friends, talk to loved ones, go back to your timelines on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and try to remember, cast your mind back. You need to start documenting those stories now before you need them. Because when you eventually need them, you will realize that it's going to be a wealth of information that is useful for you. Because like I like to emphasize, those stories you need to tell have to be original. And I've dealt with a lot of students that felt they don't have stories to tell. But when I started probing further and we worked together with them to master their scholar avatar, I asked some questions and I realized that they had a wealth of stories to tell, and these students eventually became scholarship winners. So it might look daunting now because you have not started doing the work, but when you do the work, you realize that you're actually making progress. Another way to unlock your story is by talking to past scholarship winners. So like, you know, you are probably asking, how will I find out about myself from somebody else, my own story from somebody else? If you ask the kind of stories that they told, you might have a similar type of story that you can also tell with your own touch, of course. And then, of course, strategy sessions with scholarship coach. So because you have undertaken this, you're a participant of this Pathways to Global Scholarship Bootcamp, you have the privilege of having a one-on-one with me. Yeah, so we can discuss further when we have a one-on-one about your scholarship story to see which type of stories you might potentially have. But for this to be helpful, you have to have done some reflection on your own, because I can't go into your head to find out what stories you have. But if you have done some reflection and then you need my inputs on how to make it better, and that will make this session more productive for both of us. But the point is, that's the idea. The idea is you have the story in you, you can unlock it if you choose to. So you need to avoid some things, sub stories. People come and say, because you know you want to guilt trip the scholarship judges into awarding you a scholarship. It cannot work. You are not the first person that life was bad for. You can have a sad story to tell, but that sad story need to connect to a greater picture. Like I told you about somebody that his father lost his job 2 weeks before he was born. And for 10 years of his life, things were hard for their family. So that means that person, that's not a sweet story to tell, but that story did not focus on the negative. It was focusing on the positive despite the challenges. And it showed enthusiasm and passion. It was not a sub story and, pity me kind of story. And then one thing I see, a lot of people from Africa, they want to, or the developing world, they want to paint their country as evil. So they come from a perspective of poverty porn. You are talking about how things are so bad in your country, and it doesn't change anything. The scholarship judges are not going to say because of that they want to award you a scholarship. Rather, it will tell them that you don't have a passion about your country. You don't have any love for that country. So if they give you an opportunity to leave that country, you are most likely not going to come back. So those kind of people don't get scholarships. Then Last minute rush. You are waiting to the last minute to put your applications together. One night you want to quickly write everything. Most likely you will not write the best of stories. Or you want to write, you have a lot of things in your head, you have done so many things, you think you have achieved so much, you want to put everything down in one 250 words essay. You are most likely going to have problem because you have scattered things. Scattered, disjointed. It's better to focus on one plot than to focus on many things that will not make sense. So I would advise focus on one story, and make that story to have impact. And then, like I said, show but don't tell. Don't go and be telling them that you are the best this and best that. No. By your story, you will be able to weave that thing into your story. And then, by the time the person reads it, the person will say, wow, it would have hit him. All the things you want to hit him will hit him. And one thing in your story, you must answer the questions, address all the prompts. Don't just focus on one side and leave this other side. There's a reason why they're asking you those questions. So make sure you answer the questions while resisting the temptation to ramble and also showing your achievements. Yeah, on this note, I think we have come to an end for today on our storytelling session. At this point, I'll be stopping the share. I still have one essay to show you, but I'll open the floor for comments before I show you that essay. Yeah.